welcome to storytelling for superstar teachers. So I guess most of us are creating content in one way or another, and sometimes it can be challenging to keep that engaging and make it memorable. And storytelling is a great way to solve that problem. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm joined today by Ryan.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Really glad you could join us. So Dom and I have been doing these sessions for about a month now. We've been experimenting with lots of different things. So yeah, really happy to see you guys. Just a little bit about me. I studied finance through undergrad and postgrad, and started my career working in investment advisory. And then moved to trading. And since 2013, I've been back in India and I've been working full-time in education. In between, I got really excited about Bitcoin and took a stab at trying to teach people about cryptocurrency and blockchain. That didn't really take off. And yeah, in between, I also played a fair bit of serious cricket. I have played a little bit professionally, and yeah, that's a little bit about me.
All right. So my story, I'm Dom. My story starts all with a girl, like so many stories. So my girlfriend is actually the reason I'm here with you today. Let me tell you how I got there first. So as a child, I lived on a Dutch countryside. I read books, nonfiction, fiction. And when we got our first computer, I learned programming. And I played a lot of games with my friends online. At the end of high school, most of my friends stayed close to home, but I took the jump. I went abroad to Germany, to university to study, made a lot of friends there, partied. And then I went to Sweden for an exchange program. I hung out with people from many different countries. And that's when I realized, like, hey, actually, I feel like a world citizen rather than a citizen of any particular country. And towards the end of that, I actually met a girl from Brazil, and I decided I want to go to Brazil. So I went there and I graduated there. I had a lot of fun there. I learned the language. I learned German in Germany. So now I learned Portuguese as well. But then when I came back in Europe, that relationship ended. And actually I met my current partner there, who's from China. And at the same time, I got a job in space engineering at Airbus in London. And later I went to the headquarters in France. At that point, I thought I'd learned pretty much everything in that narrow area. So I took another jump and I started a data science job at a London fintech company, a startup. And that's when I saw that, hey, you can actually help people by building a business. And I thought maybe I can do that someday because I was having a problem with learning. Whenever when I went to China, to my girlfriend's parents, I couldn't communicate with them because I tried to learn Chinese, but it was just really hard. And I realized that my learning methodology, even though I had used it to learn other languages and to do well in school, actually my methodology was weak. So I took a look at everything I learned before from books, from programming, and I turned that into a system that I could actually use and a process that actually worked to learn Chinese. And that actually started working. I learned Chinese, and then I thought, well, if I can learn Chinese with this system, then anybody can learn anything with this system. So then I started developing an app with that system, and I started creating, when I met Ryan, I started creating those super learning courses around that. So that's basically the reason I'm here with you today. So that's my introduction. And now, who will you remember in 2 weeks? Can speak up or put it in the chat.
So which one of those introductions is more likely to stay in your mind?
You're not gonna offend anybody. The next time
yeah,
you go,
yeah, don't worry. We'll reverse roles like the next time we do something.
Yeah, so Said is saying, yeah, so my introduction was a story, whereas Ryan's was more of a like bullet point list. So yeah, this was just a a little joke to demonstrate the power that stories can have when presenting content.
Cool.
All right.
Awesome.
So now Ryan is going to tell a story as well.
All right. So yeah, my turn. So since we're here to talk about storytelling, what Dom and I thought was it would be pretty cool to show you the power of storytelling through a story, right? So that's what we're going to do. And I am going to start off. And the story is about Helen Keller. Sure, all of us have heard of Helen Keller. And so we start off right from her birth. And Helen was born in 1880 in Alabama in the US. She was a very healthy baby, a happy baby. Her father, Arthur, worked for a newspaper, and her mom, Kate, was mainly at home, taking care of the home and taking care of baby Helen. So they lived on a large farm, and the farm was called Ivy Green. And because of living on the farm, she had exposure to a lot of animals. So she grew very fond of animals. She was very fond of horses, dogs, chickens, and dogs were her favorite animal through life. She kept and cared for a number of dogs throughout her life. When Helen was about 18 months old, she became really, really sick. She got a really high fever, had a really bad headache for many days. And the doctors at the time didn't really know what it was, but now we know that it might have been meningitis or scarlet fever. And Helen survived, but it was only after she recovered that her parents realized that she had lost both her sight and her hearing, right? And obviously, when they realized this, Helen's parents were in shock, and they were really concerned about her future. So at this point, we're going to take a little break in the story, and I would love it if you guys could put into the chat the little that you know about the way that the story is evolving. Just put it in the chat. Don't press enter. I'll tell you when to press enter. We'll press enter at the same time. So just type in whatever little you remember about the story. So give everyone a little more time. All right, should we go? So when I say go, we all hit enter at the same time. 1, 2, 3, go. All right.
Story of tragedy. Helen was in an accident. Hearing and sight was impaired. Helen Keller was born healthy but ends up with a disease. I guess that summarizes it quite well. So the structure of this story that you can recognize from this intro is called Man in Whole. It's basically described by this diagram. So we start at a place where everything is good or at least ordinary, but then at some point disaster strikes and things get significantly worse. And that's like the point we are right now. And then the typical story structure, as we will see, is that the hero, which we also know now is Helen, goes after this disaster, overcomes the disaster, and eventually ends up in an even better place than before. So this is what we can infer just from the intro, that this is the kind of structure that's going to follow. So to continue the story, Helen tried to communicate with the people around her. She had some special gestures she would use to indicate what she wanted, but she would very easily get frustrated because she realized she was very different from normal people. So she would get angry and kick and hit other people. And although she learned to recognize her family members by their face or by their clothing or by their perfume, she became increasingly frustrated with her inability to communicate. And then her parents, basically, they realized they had to help their daughter to lead a normal life. So they actually consulted with Alex, the inventor of the telephone, because he also worked with the deaf. And he suggested that they hire Anne Sullivan as a teacher for Helen. And this decision would change Helen's life forever. And now we're going to talk a bit about the hero's journey. The hero's journey is a very common way to describe a story. And it basically looks like this. So it kind of goes into a circle with all of those different stages. So looking at those stages, where in this circle are we right now? And again, you can put your answers into the chat or just speak up. All right, threshold, guardian, yeah. Other ideas? Yeah, everybody agrees with that. All right. Yeah, so that's, so yeah, that's true. Like we got our call to adventure, which we described was Helen's will to communicate, but not being able to. And what we just introduced was the supernatural aid, which is her new teacher, Anne Sullivan. And yeah, that's as Galicia said, the moment where we cross our first threshold.
Cool. So Anne actually entered Helen's life when Helen was just 7 years old. And Anne was a very determined young teacher, and she had actually lived with blindness herself until she was cured after a successful surgery. And what the family thought was, because Anne had actually experienced blindness herself, this unique experience of hers would actually allow her to help Helen better. And soon after Anne started working with Helen, she realized this was going to be an absolutely tremendous challenge. And one of the big problems early on was that little Helen had not really been disciplined in her life, or she had received relatively little discipline, mainly due to her physical challenges. So after establishing their initial relationship, what Anne started doing was she began to teach Helen the alphabet by like finger spelling, like on Helen's hand, by actually sort of writing the letters into the palm of Helen's hand. And after a little bit of time of doing this, Helen started recognizing a few letter combinations that Anne would write into her hand. For example, she'd put a doll into one of Helen's hands, and then on the other hand, she would actually write like D-O-L-L. So in this way, she taught Helen a number of words. And Helen would actually reciprocate by sort of repeating that action in Anne's hands. So this was the process that they used, in order to get Helen to learn how to read. And this was all well and good. Helen was clearly a fast learner, but there was one big challenge. And that challenge was that Helen wasn't actually making a connection between sort of this action of the fingers on her palm and the related concept, right? So she didn't really know what those things meant. So she didn't actually understand that all of those signs and those, letters on the hand actually had a meaning to them. And the breakthrough that actually changed Helen's world for her was when Anne actually made Helen put her hand into a stream of flowing water, while actually spelling the word water on her other hand. And this is, again, something that's really interesting because it's a very sensorial experience, right? You've got water flowing on one hand and you've got this writing on the other hand. And at that moment, immediately Helen understood that the word that was being written on one hand represented this thing that was being experienced by the other hand. And from that point on, Helen had this unrelenting desire to learn. So we're going to repeat the same thing. So Dom's going to show you the diagram of the hero's journey. And if you could type into the chat where you think we are in this journey at this point. So where in the bottom part of the diagram are we at this point?
Revelation.
Yeah.
Threshold of transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. There was this big revelation, this big aha moment, and she's ready for the transformation. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, exactly. So now we are on the way upwards. Because the next thing that Helen is going to do is learn how to read. So this she also learned from Anne Sullivan. And Helen was apparently very bright, and Anne was an amazing teacher because very soon Helen could read entire books in Braille, which is the reading system for blind people. And it's really amazing that she was able to accomplish this, because at the age of 10, she could not only read, but she could also use a typewriter. But one thing she still couldn't do was talk. So that was the next challenge. And to talk, she actually had help from Sarah Fuller, who was a teacher for the deaf. And Helen would rest her hand on Sarah's lips and learn how to feel the sound vibrations as Sarah spoke certain letters and sounds. And after that, she was able to advance to words and finally whole sentences. And this was another big breakthrough in Helen's learning journey. And after that, she had even bigger aspirations because she wanted to go to college. So she didn't want to let her disabilities get in the way of her dreams. And so in 1900, together with Anne, Helen started taking classes at Radcliffe College, which is now part of Harvard. And this was, of course, very notable because, first of all, Helen was the only one who had disabilities there, so the classes were much more challenging for her. But secondly, it was also at that time not common at all for women to go to college. So she was also one of the only women at that college. And in 1904, she was finally awarded with a Bachelor of Arts degrees and graduated with honors. And during this college time, she also began writing about her experiences being deaf and blind. So she first wrote a number of articles for a magazine, and those articles were later published in a book called The Story of My Life, which is very famous now. And a few years later, in 1908, she even published another book called The World I Live In. So now let's get back to this man in whole story structure. And I want to ask the following question: how does this situation, so we find Helen now in, compared to the situation at the start of the story? Like, just put it in the chat, like, is it better off? Yeah, the transformation. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I think it's quite clearly follows the structure. She transformed from ordinary to extraordinary. Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, she started with ordinary, But by going through this challenge and overcoming that, she became extraordinary.
Right. So after leaving Radcliffe and finishing college, Helen spent the rest of her life working on behalf of blind and deaf people all over the world. She traveled everywhere with Anne at her side. She had lots of speaking engagements in different cities, and she wrote lots of articles, essentially educating people on the significant role that deaf and blind people have in our society. So a lot of her work was essentially focused on the social aspect of education. And her work was very, very far-reaching. It won her lots of accolades, and she even won the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is a really high honor. And she also had lots of interesting and famous people who admired her. One of them was the author Mark Twain. And then we also spoke of Alexander Graham Bell. He was also a big supporter of her work and a big admirer. William James as well. And then she actually met so many presidents during her life that I remember reading an article where it said that there's been very few people who've actually met so many presidents. And so she met President Eisenhower, and she also met Kennedy. So as she went through life, it became very apparent that, you know, she was not only very, very inspirational, but she was also a person who actually gave back to society in a way which was just phenomenal. And she basically dedicated her life to helping others. She was a very, very accomplished writer. She actually went on to publish 12 books. As I mentioned, she was a very sought after speaker. She spoke all over the world. And she basically had a spirit of determination that inspired people everywhere. And it's even to this day, well into the 21st century, that we still celebrate her life, her courage, and, you know, everything that she stands for. So we've actually come to the end of Helen Keller's story. And if you could put into the chat, or even just unmute and speak if you want to, just talk about why you think that the ending is important. So we spoke a lot in the beginning. We spoke a lot about sort of her journey, but we actually completed the story with, you know, with talking about her legacy and why it means so much to us. So why do you think finishing a story, or finishing anything that you're doing, teaching for that matter, why is it so important to have an end?
Yeah.
So I think personally, one of the most important things would be, you know, to leave a legacy.
Yeah.
Because a legacy is not only something which lives on, but it's also really inspirational for people who come along after you, you know, the generation that comes after you. And the reason that we are talking right now, speaking of somebody who lived probably more than 120 years ago, is itself the answer to this question.
Exactly.
Legacy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Yep. Anyone else want to add anything?
I think it's also like the last communication. Like, as human beings, we just think of the last thing almost like in a waterfall way. It's just, so that's what we go back to. We don't necessarily think of the beginning and the middle and da-da-da. It's just like the last things, you almost wait for the next thing. So you think of the last thing first.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yeah, it sort of also ties into, when you're in a scenario where you're teaching, a recap and just going through what we've done and why we did it is crucial, because that's, as you said, that's the last thing that people take away. And that's what they're going to go away with. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And especially it's a good place also to summarize the lessons that we can actually learn from the story, which I think is especially important in teaching. So now we want to open it up a bit. I guess we can stay here because we are not too big a group. So basically, if any of you have any content that you want to teach, or which you've been struggling with, which you think is a bit boring, and you think, how can I convey that in a way that is engaging? Maybe as a group, we can talk about that and try to see if we can create some kind of story around that. So if any of you have any content that you would like to make more engaging, you can try to discuss that as a group.
Yeah, that doesn't have to be content. It could also be just some aspect of your work that you want to get across to people in a way that's more engaging, more more fun, more motivating. We can take a few minutes to brainstorm, come up with a few ideas.
Yeah, basically anything you want to get out of this session. We got some brains together now, so make use of them. Yeah, Fat?
Yeah, well, I don't have a course or a program with me at the moment, but there's something on my mind that's been going on for quite some time. And that really prompted me to get into this mode of searching and learning. And today I'm here with you guys. So there's something before the pandemic started, and that was like a spark in me, and then it became bigger because of the situation that really embroiled everybody. So the problem with, as I see, in today's world, is that people have just lost their peace of mind.
Yeah.
And you could talk about children, you could talk about adults, people who are working. I mean, every person you see around is struggling to come to terms with things that are going around with them, and they've kind of lost that connection with the inherent nature of peacefulness. So I was just wondering, what I was discussing this with a client of mine. And he's like, he works for a company which is servicing a lot of companies across the world. So he's like, we are struggling, and all of us are struggling with this problem of, coming to terms with what's going on, and how do we just be more peaceful. So I only thought of one thing. I mean, this is just the beginning. I was like, why not I get going with a course which titles itself as Unveiling Peace. So my premise was that, it's something that's inherent in all of us. It lives, we are born with that. If we weren't born with that, we wouldn't be happy babies.
Yeah.
The problem is, over the period of years as we grow, it's been layered with a lot of veils and of problems and experiences and things that really covers up the real essence of who we are and what we are supposed to be doing. So we lost purpose of our life, one, and we really lost connection with our souls. So that is what was in my mind. So I would like to actually take some kind of feedback from you all as to what you think on this, and your inputs would really be helpful for me.
I think, yeah, right, you go.
No, go for it.
Yeah, so I was thinking, because what you describe is probably common to a lot of people. So I don't know if there's any particular person, maybe yourself or somebody you have in mind, whose story during the pandemic really stands out and exemplifies this, and maybe that's something that could resonate with other people and also help them come to terms with it.
There's no such story of anybody, but I just need some ideas.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, I think, I mean, so one of the things that, you know, that Dom and I have found ever since we started trying to put out content and trying to do stuff was the thing that, you know, gets people you know, to take interest in what you're trying to do is having some sort of personal kind of, I want to say skin in the game, but like having some sort of personal story that people identify with. You know, we were putting out like a lot of content where we weren't talking about ourselves. We weren't talking about our struggles. We weren't talking about how we had, you know, gotten across certain hurdles. And as soon as we started doing that, we found that people were just engaging so much more with us, you know, and replying to our tweets, replying to posts on LinkedIn, like whatever it might be. So I think adding that personal touch and why you feel so strongly about it is what's going to draw people to you, right? Because they need to feel that connect. They need to feel like, hey, like I look at it the same way, and you know, why don't I get in touch with this person? Yeah, that's sort of just my 2 cents. But yeah, I'd love to hear what Charlotte, Galiza, what do you think?
Yeah, I certainly feel having a story kind of, it's like that human connection, and it kind of brings things out and it makes sense. But equally, people cannot relate to that story and not then connect with you and where you're at. But I think you're going to have that either way with like the topic. So it's you might as well just be yourself and then bring the people who want to be with you along that journey. And so like Fahad, you said that you didn't have any particular person in mind, but yet you observe people in it. So it's still a story about the people you observe. And that can also be really powerful. Like I observe this, it's kind of, it's like impartial, which in some ways could be more powerful depending on how you share it and or even like how you feel about what you see, for example, which I feel like is probably the main message here, and how it touches you and it makes you bring this up with your client or in conversations with other people.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Charlotte. Galiza, Fahad, anything to add?
Thanks so much. I really appreciate that. I think Galiza just mentioned that she goes along with Charlotte's version here.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else has something they want to create stories around? Galiza?
Yeah, hi everyone.
Hey.
I don't know, this is my first time. For background, I teach fiction writing, so storytelling is technically my jam, but this will be my first time using storytelling as, you know, to tell a story about myself, because I've been writing for years, and that's all I know about storytelling. But I find that when trying to use it to tell the story about myself, my experience, it's hard. I don't know. It's just different, because in fiction you project everything into characters, whereas when talking about yourself, I don't have that kind of confidence yet. So that's why I'm here, to be honest. And then I don't know, how does storytelling work with Twitter threads? Do you guys ever created any content in a form of Tweetstorms, but because it's Tweetstorms and they're separated into different tweets, don't you think that's kind of hard to, you know, to make it continuous, to make the story close easily. Because yeah, I'm trying to level up my Twitter game right now, and then I just find out that it's really hard. So I would like to hear from any one of you who might have experienced the same way. Thank you.
Yeah, I think like Tweetstorms are definitely challenging because it's quite short. So it's I guess if you can tell a story that's short, it can be quite powerful. I don't know if I've ever managed that. So Ryan and I before this session we did create one piece of content which I created, which is about a book called Never Split the Difference, which is about negotiation. And I basically took a story from that book and I split it like in a similar way that we split the Helen Keller story. And then we have prompts, which basically then talk about the principles that a story is actually trying to teach. So that's one way we are currently experimenting with how we can use stories around content. And then I think the other interesting thing you mentioned is like, yeah, how to apply that to your real life, right? And tell about yourself. I don't know if anybody else has tips for that. So I think one thing that helps me is to think about myself in the third person, so you can think a bit more objectively. But I don't know if anybody else has ideas.
I think one thing that I used to do when I started out was I shared like whatever I'd written. I shared it only with close friends and family initially. And, you know, sort of, and it wasn't done in a way, it's like in a way where it was like, oh, I've written this and, you know, like, because you know me, read it and tell me how it is. I just put it out on groups, you know, family groups and stuff like that, and groups of friends. And like, I wasn't really expecting anything from it. I just put it out. And I didn't know how people would react. You know, I was like, I don't even know if I'm a good writer. I don't even know if, like, it was all of those usual things, right? Is my story even worth listening to? Like, you know, why should anyone listen to me? Like all of those thoughts, right? And it was really interesting because some of the people who I hadn't connected with in ages, you know, they'd sort of get back to me after reading my stuff and say like what, I remember the one thing where I realized that, you know what, I really should write more is this friend of mine who I hadn't spoken to in years, like he's in England, I'm in India, you know, we haven't really had contact. His exact words were, damn, that story spoke to my soul. And I was like, whoa, like, you know, like this guy has no incentive to sort of just make me feel good for no reason, right? I haven't met him in like 6-7 years. And like, that gave me a lot of confidence. You know, I was like, oh, okay, like maybe there's something there. And then I just kept doing more of that. And then it just sort of grows, you know, like there's always going to be people out there who relate to what you're saying. And it's, I think like you just got to keep putting yourself out there.
Yeah, thank you guys. I think Dom mentioned a very interesting thing where he kind of writes the story first, you know, as a narrative, yeah, not as a tweet, but as a writing in a whole, and then you just turn it into tweets. So that's something that I haven't tried yet, because for me tweeting is more easy than writing itself, because I'm not used to writing in English that much. But I think that's something to be tried. So thank you so much, everyone. Maybe if there's anything else that you want to tell to me, I will be so grateful.
All right. Thanks, Kalisa. All right. Yeah, Ryan, shall we move on? I think you still have some theory,
yep.
Right?
We can just speed through the last bit. So yeah, this is more like in terms of, it could be used in any context where you're trying to get information across to people, but it's specifically to do with storytelling. So whether that's writing or even when you're in front of people. So fundamentally, the way our brain works is we don't pay attention to boring things. Where the way we've been wired, through the ages, back when we didn't have houses, we didn't have shelter, we always looked out for like that ruffle in the bushes, the sound that we weren't expecting, that sort of stuff, right? So we were always looking out for things that were not normal. And that's probably why even these days on social media, like we don't spend time going through stuff that we're not drawn to, right? So that's like number one point, like we don't pay attention to boring things. So first thing to sort of remind yourself of when you sit down to write or talk or do whatever, is like, can't be boring. So you do your best to make it not boring. Can you go to the next slide, though? Yeah. So this is just an idea from cognitive science. And this is more related to learning. So this would be something that we want to keep in mind when we're actually conducting courses, workshops, teaching people, which is that, the more attention that the brain pays to a given stimulus, the more elaborately that information is encoded, right? And that's just another way of saying that, the more elaborately the information is stored in the brain, the longer it's going to remain in your memory, and the quicker that you'll actually be able to retrieve it from memory. So bringing storytelling into whatever it is that you're doing plays a big role in this process, because people start visualizing about what you're talking. They start making these images in their mind. They start forming these stories within the story that you're telling. And that just sits in the mind so much more firmly than, let's say, just like my introduction, 6 bullet points. Like, I'm sure none of you even remember what I said. It was dry. There's no point listening to it. Yeah. Right. So this point is more to do with when you're conducting longer sessions. So sessions like this one, 60 minutes or even longer than 60 minutes. So again, there's a lot of research shows that the attention span, or actually the quality of attention from people that you're talking to, it increases rapidly right after you start. And then it reaches a peak at about 10 minutes. And then after 10 minutes, it starts to fall again. Right. And we keep going in waves like these. And the trick as a teacher or as the person conducting the session is to make sure that every time we get close to that 10-minute ticker, you get your participants or your audience to do something. So in this case, what we did was we had you type into the chat. So things like, where do you think we are in our journey, or like what you think has happened in the story, things like that. So it was just a way of making sure that, as we're going through the story, you're still engaging actively with the content. So not only are you listening to us, but you're also actively thinking about something that we've asked you. And this one is kind of obvious, but it's an easy one to miss. And that is that emotionally charged events are just better remembered. And as storytellers, as teachers, we want to make sure that we're infusing as much emotion, like not only from ourselves, but also in the content. So the content needs to be written up or designed in a way where it speaks to people's emotions. And the moment you can start doing that, that ensures that you have a lot more engagement, and it also ensures that people remember the content a lot better. And yeah, this is just the last point. So stories bring brains together. So there's nothing like a story that helps get people to the same level. And especially when you're in groups and let's say you're running a course and you've got, 4, 6, or 8 weeks where you're going to be together, you're going to be doing stuff together. There's nothing like a story to get everyone to become empathetic about the content and about what you're trying to accomplish. So as far as possible, we've got to keep telling people stories related to the content, related to the outcomes that we're looking for, because that's what increases everyone's level of empathy and interest in what we're trying to do.